person involved brutally raped, I believe it was 7 women, killed one of them. Several of them were teenagers. And in the sentencing of them, the judge commented that clearly he was mentally ill. And that illness clearly reduces his culpability, that he can't really appreciate the heinousness of what he's doing, and use that as grounds to reduce his sentence. Below, I believe, the recommended, the mandatory minimum. Or another judge where he presided, or another case that he presided over as a judge shortly after becoming a judge, where he did not disclose that he had acted as a defense attorney on that case before he was appointed as a judge. That's a judicial ethics violation. These are the people being put on the federal appeals courts. And then, of course, we have what's going on with the U.S. Supreme Court, where Elena Kagan, who says that the military's don't ask, don't tell policy, which, by the way, that's not the military's policy. That was put in law by Congress. The military is merely doing its sworn duty to uphold the law as it's written. Yet she didn't say that Congress passed and that Democrat president I used to serve under signed into law. Instead, somehow it's the military's fault. And so she kicks him off campus and is unanimously reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Unanimously, with even John Paul Stevens, who she will replace, saying, yeah, you can't do that. Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, these are the people that the president is putting on the bench to rubber stamp his agenda. Is the individual mandate for Obamacare unconstitutional? Yes. But what? The Supreme Court says it's okay. Can you make law like card check or cap and trade through executive regulation? Absolutely not. Unless you have a Supreme Court who says, no, that's okay. So on each of these 20 issues, we explain how it's unconstitutional, who can fight back, how to fight back, because the reality is we need to win in 2010. We need to win in 2012. There are things that even if we take back both houses of Congress, there are things we still cannot stop for as long as this president is serving in his term of office. There are things that we can't stop or undo until January 20th of 2013. But we can't afford to wait that long. And so we wrote a book to explain the point, to tie it all together, that not only is this unconstitutional, that unconstitutional, when you set it side by side, a pattern emerges. And it's a pattern of using and abusing the levers of power in this country to fundamentally transform the United States. And then we saw that that's exactly what the president said in October of 2008, 5 days before the election. And that's why it's the quote that we lead off the introduction with in the beginning of the book. So this is serious stuff. These are serious times in which we live. We are racking up debt and growing government at a pace that every person in this room, to the end of our natural days, will still be dealing with the consequences of, because it's already on such an absolutely runaway scope. Now, there were all sorts of problems that we were facing before this president came to power, but he's taken those problems and he's put them on steroids. And he's done it in a way that tramples the Constitution, which was specifically erected by our founding fathers and adopted by we as a people, as a nation, to keep him or any other president from fundamentally transforming the United States. So by all means, we're open. That's pretty much what the book is about. That's what we're about. And that's the message that we've been sharing across the country. So happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
This is for both of you. I understand why you wrote the book. I guess my question is, what made you choose each other to write it with? Because by putting your name on a book together, you're in essence representing together. You know, you're identifying yourself with each other. So why did you two choose each other to write it with?
Well, we've been working together in various organizations for 5 years. And I've had the opportunity to have on-the-ground experience in a variety of areas. I've been the mayor of a city, treasurer of a state, secretary of a state, a U.S. ambassador, representing our country in the United Nations on matters of human rights. I've had an opportunity to run a business and to create jobs, and we both have families. Ken is one of the brightest, most aggressive constitutional lawyers that I've ever come across. And I figured that since he was about the same age as my middle child, that we could form a relationship and I could exploit his work ethic and marvel at his intelligence in partnership as we in fact worked on this book. And that's what it is. We do a lot of writing together and individually, so we weren't new to one another. We've been critics of each other's work, but more importantly, you know, yeah, we've been critics, but I remind them.
Critics in a good way.
But I remind him that, yes, I'm about the same age as your dad, so be kind to me. What we understood almost instantly, and I know that as we went forward on this book, it became even more clear to us that we share a worldview. And that worldview transcends ethnic and racial differences, age differences. You know, it is a worldview that is based in our faith and our appreciation for American exceptionalism. You know, we do believe, as Lincoln said, that America is not perfect, but it is perfectible. So you got to get in there. You got to get your hands dirty. You have to be bloody, but not foul. But you have to fight. And I'm a shareholder of the Cincinnati Reds, and one of the things about baseball history is that I know the sayings of some of baseball's greats. Everybody quotes Yogi Berra. But Satchel Paige once said that it's very difficult to steal second base if you want to keep one foot on first base. And I needed somebody that I knew had heart and who had daring. And this young man has shown me over the last 6 years that there's no fight that he shies away from. And once again, he's ready to plant the flag of liberty on any battlefield. But that's how we came together. We're not new to one another. We've had each other's blood splattered on the other in our political bouts. So that's what it is.
One minute. I have a question. How do you propose to attain American exceptionalism? Do you support being exceptional abroad by being exceptional at home, or do you support us being exceptional abroad of people's own free will to decide for themselves that we are exceptional, or do you support being exceptional by projecting force around the world so that people are basically saying you need to bow down to us, we're exceptional? You know what I'm talking about? How do you propose to make us exceptional?
Well, first of all, I'd say we don't propose to make us exceptional. America already is exceptional. And unlike our president, I don't say that I think America is exceptional the way that the Greeks think that Greece is exceptional. Which, by the way, if you look at their current economic situation, it's an exceptional mess. So that was an ironic choice for him to say, oh, we're exceptional the exact same way you are. Well, I'm afraid we're heading that way, actually. But I would say that from a value standpoint, America is exceptional. We are what Ronald Reagan called the shining city on a hill. We are the light. I've seen a number of countries in my day. Ken, as an ambassador, has been to over 70 nations across the globe. There is no nation where people are freer and left more to realize their God-given potential than the United States. Now, in terms of how that impacts the rest of the globe, and I'll defer to the ambassador on matters of foreign policy, but U.S. policy always has to be predicated on what is in the best interest of this nation and the American people.
Yeah, and look, it's been said that we are a friend of liberty everywhere, a custodian of our own. But as important as that statement is, let me use two metaphors in terms of the execution of U.S. foreign policy and within the context of our exceptionalism. We can choose to be either a gardener or a mechanic. If we choose to be a mechanic, that means that we try to fix every problem everywhere, no matter where the problem is on the globe. As a gardener, we can, again, be true to that notion of being a friend. We can be supportive of those who want to take a stand for liberty in their own home country. We can do it within the context of our vital interests. So I'm not retreating, and I don't think we, in our book, advocate retreating to the shores of the U.S. We, in fact, have one thing that the president can do, and that is to shape our foreign policy. Where I disagree with the Obama administration isn't that we have been involved in things international, is that he is ready to concede a lot of our sovereignty as a nation to the United Nations and to a philosophy of globalism. That is something that I think we have to speak up and out against, because at the end of the day, our sovereignty as a people will rest on our ability to first make sure that we remain a free people in every sense of the word, and that includes not relegating our future to the Chinese economically.
Right. So how, after writing this book and doing all of this, what kind of response are you getting, and how positive and confident do you feel that we can kind of like reclaim our nation, and how do you feel now after you've written the book?
Because of Ken's brilliance, we have...
Conveniently, his name is also...
We've hit the #1 on the Washington Post bestseller. We've been #1 on Amazon in a couple of categories. So the response has been favorable, but this is a tough business, the book business. And so you have Sean Hannity and Newt Gingrich and Glenn Beck, and I tell Glenn all the time, that's not fair. You have your own radio show and TV show. I think the ideas that we promote in the book, that we advance, they've gotten traction. And so we've just been pleased with the sale, and people who know more about the business than we do tell us that for this book at this time, our sales are more than just average. They're very good.
And by the way, American exceptionalism is covered in chapter 3.
Young man over here.
This isn't relating to the book, but just on the note of relating to the Constitution, what do you think about the federal government suing Arizona over the immigration law?
Well, that depends. I would say if it was an immigration law, the federal government would have a great shot. But I would say this is not an immigration law. And in fact, I wrote a column for Fox News describing that. Article 1 of the Constitution does say that immigration is purely and exclusively an issue of the federal government, and that is how the Supreme Court has interpreted it. However, what is immigration? Immigration is determining who can enter this country, who can stay in this country, if you're here, who can become a citizen, and the process to remove from this country someone who doesn't fit into those categories. The Arizona law does none of those things. It's not letting anyone across the border. It's not kicking anyone back over the border. And it's certainly not declaring that someone is a citizen. This gets back to what I said we discuss in the introduction of the book about the difference between federal and state governments. States are governments of general jurisdiction. If you are living and operating in the state of Arizona, or any other state, but it's Arizona's law, so in the state of Arizona. If you're working for a business, you're violating Arizona labor law and Arizona business law. If you're presenting documentation to do so, you're committing document fraud, you're committing identity theft. Those are crimes, some of those are even felonies. If you're not working, then you are either engaged in criminal activity, which is by its very definition illegal, or you're living off of public welfare. And again, since documentation has to be provided for that, you're engaged in criminal acts of fraud there. So this is Arizona asserting its legitimate state police power interests governing public safety, public health, social morality, and general welfare. It's perfectly constitutional. If they try and argue it's an immigration law, they're going to lose. If they argue it is a police power law, they're going to send the Obama administration packing, as well they should.
And I think that's it's important. This provides us with an opportunity to just to give you our MO on how we attack the book. From the immigration standpoint, and the federal standpoint, having been at the State Department, I had an appreciation for immigration policy. But being a former mayor, former treasurer of a state, I understand what Ken just laid out, and that is the police power of the state and the obligation of mayors and state officials, governors, to provide for public safety. And I can tell you right now, what Ken didn't tell you is that we both have spent a lot of time on the ground in Arizona. And, you know, my thing is, in the broader public arena, we ought to be putting a spotlight on the fact that Arizona's number one, number two, it goes back and forth in the world in terms of kidnapping. You know, it is a severe threat to public safety. And the president has not been any more effective in dealing with that public safety problem in Arizona than he has been in managing the cleanup of the spill. So, I mean, they're overwhelmed with the spill, and they're overwhelmed with this immigration public safety challenge. And if I was a voter in Arizona, my expectation would be my mayor, my city council, my county supervisors, my state officials have an obligation to take whatever police action they need to take to protect the safety of my family and my neighbors. You know, my whole thing is that Eric Holder, you know, is more of a problem than he is an asset in both immigration and public safety. But he is the president's choice, and I'm hoping that we hold the president, Holder, and anybody who believes that he should remain there accountable in the 2010 elections.
And if you've never been to Arizona, the temperature is about what you're experiencing right now, except they say that there it's a dry heat. By the way, on the dry heat, don't buy it. So is an oven, so is a blast furnace, so is a blowtorch.
I just have a couple of questions. For years now, we've driven away from the government documents of the United States, not only under this president, but previous president. I can go back to 1916 income tax on land. There's a big controversy about that, saying that's not unconstitutional either. But it has not been overturned. There's been a couple of cases on the Supreme Court where they had ruled it unconstitutional. I guess because of the way they designed it for federal taxes on labor. And I do know in the Constitution somewhere it states that it tries to define a man and his labor and being a contract or an agreement between two people, rather than just no capital gain. So what I'm saying is you have a lot of controversy about laws and different things being centered around the Constitution. Number two is, I do know President Obama studied the Constitution, so I'm not surprised that you would have a difficult time challenging, because he indoctrinated, I guess, with the Constitution. So my question to you is, even though you wrote this brilliant book, how is it going to play where it really, really should play, and that's in politics and influencing policy? I mean, I'm all good for the bestsellers list, but I'm not impressed in a certain instance, because to change policy, to really, you got to fight a real fight.
Yeah, you had to fight a real fight. And
real fight.
you go back to 1994, the Republicans that year won 52 or 54 seats in the House, and they won 10 seats in the Senate. Now, I would suggest to you that challenging the Obama administration on what we deem to be illegal actions and unconstitutional actions feeds a grassroots rebellion across the country. I would suggest to you that we'll know whether or not this is moving people come November. We'll know whether it's moving people based on the number of states and a number of localities that challenge the constitutionality of a lot of the actions of the Obama administration. We already see that on Obamacare that we have some 15 states that have taken that action. I would suggest to you that depending on who you listen to, Republicans could win anywhere from 28 seats to 40 seats in the House, and anywhere from 7 seats to 10 seats in the legislature. And then we can come back and we can have this discussion as to whether or not our book contributed to the political mobilization of the resistance to the unconstitutional action of Team Obama. I would suggest to you that while he was a Harvard-trained lawyer and he was an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago on the Constitution, he in fact, that only suggests to me that he knows exactly what he's doing in subverting it.
No, I appreciate that you go to the right place, though, by looking to the Constitution and how it's interpreted. Now, for example, the income tax was first held unconstitutional in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust, 1895. Then the 16th Amendment was passed. Now, there was a lawsuit regarding the validity of the 16th Amendment. The Supreme Court upheld it. Now, then beyond that, in the Eisner versus McComber and in the Crenshaw Glass case, the court then goes on to define what income is, and it's really just any accretion of wealth, including in exchange for labor.
About labor.
It says nothing.
The Constitution talked about capital gains, but also made reference to what they deem labor to be.
Actually, you're not going to. There's one contracts clause in Article 1. It doesn't use the word labor. Constitution's 4,440 words long. Labor actually doesn't show up in it. But you're right to go to the Constitution, getting back to that, and taking a look at the original understanding of the Constitution as to what is it exactly that these words mean. Because a deliberative, principled discussion focusing on the original meaning of the Constitution is exactly how we get where we need to go in terms of reining government back in. We haven't had a conservative government in this country since the 1920s. We had a conservative president in Ronald Reagan, but it was a Democrat-controlled U.S. House, and it went from a moderate Republican control, there were conservative Republican senators, but moderate Republican control of the U.S. Senate to Democrat control of the U.S. Senate. We haven't had unified conservative control of government since the 1920s, and of course that was called the Roaring 20s because the economy was taking off.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what you guys think about the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution and how the use of that clause led to just complete disregard of the 10th Amendment.
So glad you asked about that, because I just wrote a column on it. The necessary and proper clause is, if left unconstrained, the most dangerous provision of the U.S. Constitution. Because necessary and proper to what? Depending on what you predicate that on, you can do anything. You know, Universal government run, government provided health care. Well, it's necessary and proper. Well, necessary and proper to what? Certainly not to freedom. Now, the Supreme Court made clear as recently as, well, actually first, in McCullough v. Maryland, one of the most famous Supreme Court cases of all time, written by the great Chief Justice, as he's called, Chief Justice John Marshall, explained that the purpose of the necessary and proper clause is to carry into effect the enumerated powers of the Constitution. Now, just as recently as a couple weeks ago, we saw that principle fall to the ground in the Comstock case, U.S. versus Comstock, where at issue was the federal civil commitment statute. And that is, there was a federal law in the books that if you were locked up in prison, in a federal prison, and while you were in prison, you were deemed to be sexually dangerous by the federal government. Now, you didn't have to be incarcerated for any sex-related crime, but while you're there, they go through whatever process they do to deem you sexually dangerous. And if your home state was unwilling to take you at the end of your prison term, they could just go ahead and keep you locked up, potentially indefinitely. And that issue was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was just recently upheld in a 7-2 vote on necessary and proper grounds. Now, Justice Thomas, who was the most conservative justice on the court, and Justice Scalia, who is the second most conservative, made the case that they said, as I just said, necessary and proper to what? Unless you can point to a specific provision of the Constitution that this is necessary and proper to, then this is an illegal action. Now, Justice Alito upheld it very, very narrowly. Justice Kennedy, more broadly, it is an item of concern that Chief Justice John Roberts, who is, in many regards, considered a conservative justice, signed on to the majority opinion by Justice Stephen Breyer, giving a very broad and, I think, frankly, a frightening reading of the necessary and proper clause. And I think the lesson that we take away from that is that what this country needs is not necessarily Republicans. What this country needs are conservatives dedicated to the original meaning and understanding of the U.S. Constitution. We need more Clarence Thomases and more Antonin Scalias on the U.S. Supreme Court.
This is you made a good point in terms of but